You're listening to Kizuki, the podcast. I'm Mae Yoshikawa, and I define the Japanese concept of Kizuki as the following. Kizuki 1. A moment of epiphany, an aha of realization or insight which opens the knower to a new dimension of truth that was formerly unknown. 2. Steps in an incremental growth of awareness, resulting in a movement from ignorance to greater awareness of the bigger picture. A kind of knowing that cannot be undone, that cannot be unrealized. As a longtime yoga and meditation practitioner, a world traveler, and curious self-explorer, I'm obsessed with Kizukis. Listen on each week for inspiring and enlightening stories that may just tip you over for your next aha. On this week's episode, are you too deep or just closed off? Are you a deep feeler or a deep thinker like I am? And if you are, have you ever had moments in your life where you felt different from others? Maybe like you didn't quite belong, or maybe even felt alone. I used to believe that being deep made me different from others. I just felt somehow separate. And that belief didn't come from nowhere. When I started university, I remember my friends would go to gokon, these group hangouts where boys and girls would drink, laugh, flirt, and get to know each other. I would get invited too, well, for the first semester. But I repeatedly said no to their invitations every time I had one, and eventually no one bothered to ask me anymore. So by the second semester, I just wasn't invited. I remember one guy who later became a good friend. He came up to me and he said right to my face, "What, do you think you're too cool or something?" And I actually appreciated his frankness that he said it to my face, and we became friends soon after. But the truth was, it was never that I thought I was better than anyone. The truth was that my mother had been diagnosed with a neurological disease, a young onset dementia. She was losing her abilities quickly. Change was an everyday thing, a weekly thing for us. She couldn't cook anymore. She couldn't manage her finances. She couldn't live on her own. We were losing her. And I was right there in it, trying to support her, trying to hold things together at 18, 19 years old. So, no, I couldn't cheerfully go out drinking beer and cocktails. It wasn't that I thought I was different. It's that my life required something different from me. A part of me was already living in a different dimension. After all, none of my university friends could relate to this. If anything, it was like their parents who were just beginning to deal with aging parents. So, with all of this going on in my life, I didn't yet have the awareness or appreciation to call it depth back then. But I sure felt alone. I sure felt the distance. Years later, after a long practice of yoga and meditation and all of these self-reflective things, I was running my yoga and wellness studio in Omotesando in central Tokyo. One of my clients at the time, she was the wife of a major fashion company owner, and she had been coming to my yoga and meditation classes for a while. She was hooked. She enjoyed it so much that she told her husband all about it and eventually even convinced her husband to take classes at my studio as well. Soon after that, they invited me to dinner because they wanted to get to know me. We had a lovely dinner. It was at this amazing restaurant, and we had this beautiful, warm, open conversation. At some point, I said something, and I don't even remember what it was, to be honest, but I remember what the husband said back to me because it left such an impression to this day. He said back to me, "Oh, you're that type." And he didn't have to explain what that meant because it was implied that I was the deep type, the intense type, the one who's too heavy in her thinking type. And this hurt me because I felt misunderstood and labeled in the moment. I felt othered at a first time dinner that we were sharing. But in hindsight, I also must admit that it hurt because at that point in my life, I don't think I could fully own my authentic self yet. Air quotes, depth and all. Since then, later on in my 30s, life has asked even more depth of me, the most defining being the loss of my husband. Because grief has a way of plunging you into depths you didn't ask for. And while that kind of grief doesn't come to everyone early, I know that many of you listening, you're not just deep thinkers. You're deep feelers, and that's why you're here. And deep feelers can feel isolated at times, especially in spaces that move lightly, spaces that don't quite meet you in your depth. And in those moments, it's easy to think that, oh, maybe I'm just different. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm just never going to be understood here. And I know that because I've definitely thought those things too. But recently, I'm beginning to question those silent conclusions that I have held in my heart. Maybe unintentionally so, because I began to recognize that I was allowing that belief to separate me from the world, whether light or musical or not. So this is the question I started to ask myself. Maybe, or what if, what if it was never my depth that separated me from others, but how I held it? Because when I look back, I can see that while many people didn't understand me, especially not in so much grief, so early, so deep, I also hadn't been meeting them where they were because I was so lost in my depth that I had unintentionally left people behind who couldn't meet me in those deeper waters. Not out of arrogance, but simply because I just didn't know how to. I didn't know how to meet them. I didn't know how to be jolly in those grief moments. I didn't know how to stay open in the face of someone who didn't seem to be able to understand me in my experience. In other words, I wasn't able to hold my own. And that's not their fault. I mean, I guess it's not my fault either, but what I'm admitting to is that maybe there was some small part of me that was making it their fault. And now I see that I don't want that to be reason enough for me to close myself off and distance myself from them, from the world. And I know that the world can be harsh at times, but I guess what I'm saying is that I'm someone who wants to lean in to the many wonders of the world too, even though it can come with risks, that I'm willing to lean into that again. Okay, so these are the questions I've been asking myself, And I felt inclined to share it with you, deep feelers. Where in your life have you closed yourself off in the name of protecting yourself? And instead of waiting for someone to meet you in your depths, where and how might you choose to meet someone where they are instead? Whew. I know I'm still in the process of learning this, that depth and openness don't cancel each other out, but they do ask something of us. Not to be less deep, but maybe just to lean into staying open and flexible to new possibilities as we meet others where they are. Thank you for listening. If you missed the recent Kizuki Journaling online session, the on-demand replay is now available at maey.live under On Demand. And if you'd like to be the first to know when the next live session opens, you can sign up for my weekly newsletter at the bottom of maey.live or kizukijournaling.com.